Welcome to class. My name is Terry Santra and I'm the head moose at Purple Moose Designs. Now there are certain quilting and craft projects that just need a little something extra. That's what today's class is all about. We're going to be making this cute little wall hanging, and we're going to be using artificial flowers, beads, buttons, and all kinds of other unusual items to bring a little something extra to your project. It's time to bring on the bling. Are you ready? Let's go. It's time to get started. So as I said, we're going to be making this wall hanging, and we're going to be using artificial flowers and beads, buttons, and some other stuff. And I'm going to show you how to attach all of those things to your quilting or craft projects. So what are you going to need? Well, to start off, you're going to need a half yard of background fabric. You want it to kind of read as a solid. You don't want it too busy. You don't want to take away from the project itself. And when you get your half yard of fabric, you can create your project in the vertical, as I do in this video, or you could create it in the horizontal. Totally your choice. So what else are you going to need? Well, you're going to need some artificial flowers. Now, I would suggest at least 2 different kinds. Maybe you need more. That's okay. And then you're going to need something to embellish them with, whether that's beads, buttons, or other items. If you choose beads, you're going to need some beading needles or milliner's needles. Sometimes they're called straw needles. You're going to need thread in various colors to coordinate with your beads. If you choose buttons, you're going to need some buttons. You're going to need some thread or embroidery floss and a needle. And then everything else is pretty much normal sewing supplies, scissors, sewing machine, stuff like that. Now, I know some of you like a very precise supply list, and that's not what I just gave you. And there's a reason for that. This project is very much about improv and letting your creativity just let loose. So it's not really precise in what you're going to need. Now, I would suggest that you watch through the video. I do give you lots of tips on how to choose flowers, what kind of the best ones, what ones to avoid, what kind of beads work, what kind of buttons work, and some of the other items that you may want to attach and how to attach them. So watch through the video first, then go get your supplies, then come back and we can go through and make our project together. It's time to get started. Are you ready? Let's go. I'm so excited. All right, so for this project, we're going to need 2 different kinds of flowers. Now, I chose the purpley blue flowers and the cream colored flowers. You can choose whatever you'd like. Now, artificial flowers come in all different kinds of shapes, sizes, whatever. So everybody's project is going to look totally different from each other, and that's just fine. And artificial flowers come from anywhere from very inexpensive to super expensive silk ones. You can use whatever you like. It doesn't really matter. But there are a couple things that you need to look for. So if you find your flowers that you like, make sure that you can take the petals off. Now, some of them have, some of them have plastic. So these leaves have plastic on the back. That doesn't come off, and you can't sew through that, and it shows. I don't like the looks of that myself, but you want to try and find flowers that don't have that plastic stuff on the back. So sometimes they're just a matter of pulling the little petals off. You just pull gently and it just comes right off, and there's your little petal. Now these cream ones they're a little bit larger down here on the bottom, and they go up to a little bit smaller on the top. So you just pull off however many you need, and I kind of kept the same shape and just laid them all out how I wanted them. Now the blue ones have all different colors. There's some really dark ones, some really light ones, and they vary a little bit in size. So what I did was put more of the darker ones down on the bottom and the lighter ones on the top, and just kind of freeform my shape that I wanted. Now, these are attached a little bit differently. They have this little plug on here. So you just need to pull that plastic plug off. And gently disengage it. So you'll get this little plug, this little plastic plug. Just throw that away. And then you're left with your petal. And that's what we'll use in our project. So there you go. That's your flowers. Go find your flowers. Oh, and if you're lucky enough to find a bunch like this that has several different flowers all together, you're one step ahead of the game. Have fun picking out your flowers. So once you have all your petals laid out how you want them, then you're going to want to pin them all in place. Here's a picture of my project as it was pinned. So once they're pinned in place, you just want to make sure that they're all hooked on. So as you manipulate it when you're sewing on your buttons or beads or whatever you're going to use, then they won't fall off. So that's it for now. So happy hunting for your flowers, and let's get to embellishing. Okay, let's start off with an easy embellishment. Buttons. Now, I'm sure you've all sewn a button on, so I don't need to show you how to do that. But let me show you something else that you can do with buttons. So for this particular project, the flowers that I chose didn't really lend themselves to buttons for me. However, whatever flowers you choose, you may decide to use some buttons. So here's some ways that you can use them a little bit differently. Now, you could just choose kind of a funky button like this and sew it on to your flower. Or you can stack your buttons like this. This is two different buttons. And on both of these, I've chosen to use embroidery floss. And I leave the knot on top of the buttons and then cut the tails just a little bit long. And then it kind of looks like the stamen of a flower. Now this one, I chose some novelty buttons to use as the center, little fishies. There's some more stacked buttons. Let's see. This one also has some stacked buttons on it with the embroidery floss on the top. Just a funky, plain, simple button in the middle of this one. Also, again, with the embroidery floss on top. Now, when you do your embroidery floss and you leave the tails long, if you just kind of rub it with your finger a little bit, it'll kind of separate those threads. And it kind of looks like the stamen of a flower. Here's another example of a stacked button. So it has a pink flower novelty button with a little purple button in the center. Now, if you want to use buttons in other projects, of course, on the flip-flops back here, this has two stacked buttons on top of it. This just has really large yellow ones. Of course, you can just sew on some buttons. So little snowmen with their little buttons. This is one of my patterns. It's called Countdown to Christmas, and it's an advent calendar for Christmas. So it's a big tree, and I've used some of my vintage buttons that add some sparkle. And this pattern actually has little pockets down here that you can put little trinkets in, and then each day you just add one onto the buttons. Or you could put a little chocolate or something in there if you wanted to just enjoy the sparkle of the button. And another fun thing to do with buttons. So I did this project, and it's very old-fashioned looking. And when I got it all done, one of these corners didn't come out quite pretty. So I took some buttons off of an old pair of jeans and sewed them right on there, and it just covered up my boo-boo. So if your flowers look like maybe they need some buttons, that may be something that you can do. Let's get on to the next thing. All right, the other thing that we're going to need to add beads to our project is beads. So just like artificial flowers, beads come in all shapes, all sizes, all colors. They range from very inexpensive seed beads on up to very expensive huge beads and everything in between. So the sky is the limit. Whatever you're going to choose is the right thing for your project. So I will give you one place that I like to find beads that's a little bit unusual is thrift stores or garage sales. You can find old jewelry for pennies on the dollar. So this one has pearls. They're not real pearls, but this one has like pearl. They almost look like freshwater pearls. This one has some bigger pearl-like things on it. This is one I almost chose. This one does have the graded size, but the colors didn't quite match up well enough. So pick out your flowers and then kind of audition some different ones. So here's a photo of the auditioning process that I used to pick out the beads for my project. All right, so what I ended up with, actually, let me take this off. And let me get the close-up camera and I'll show you what I used on mine. All right, so here's my project. So for the cream beads, I decided to use the lighter color from this mix. And these are kind of a matte frosted bead. And what I did was put 3 in the middle of each flower petal. And I sewed each of the 3 individually onto the center of each petal. Now for the blue flowers, I chose 2 different beading processes. This one is, actually there's 3 different beads in here. So I have these 2. This is kind of a clear, but it's blue, and this is more of a blue bead. So some of them have the clear ones, some of them have the blue, and it has kind of a white stripe in the middle. Now I did use blue thread because it does show a little bit. And then when I got down to the bottom here, to the darker petals, I wanted a darker bead, but I didn't have any that were big enough, so I chose some smaller beads. These here. Just some smaller seed type beads in a dark blue that went well. And what I did was I came up from the back through the petal. I put 2 beads on, went back down to the bottom, came back up, did 3 right next to it, and then they kind of pile up there in the center. Now, when you're sewing beads on a project, I'll show you the back here. You can see there's threads all over the place here as I travel from spot to spot. And as you're doing this, as you come up and you go back down and you move over to the next one, you want to make sure you don't pull too tight and then you get this little wrinkle in here. So you want to make sure that you keep it flat. Now, if you were traveling and you have a very light colored background, sometimes those threads will show through. Now, I wasn't really concerned about it too much on here because the petals are all so close together that even if this was a white background, they really wouldn't show because the petals are going to hide all of that for me. And that's it. Let me show you how to do one. Okay, let's add some beads to the quilt. So I just have little scraps here just to show you how I did it on the big quilt. So I have the dark blue petal and the cream colored petal. And I'm going to add the 5 dark blue beads to the blue one and the 3 cream ones to here. So first thing you want to do is come up from the back. Now there is this hole in the middle. You don't want to come up through the hole. You want to come up through the petal itself because this is what's going to secure it down. So I'm just going to come up right next to the hole. And I'll leave a long tail on the back. And I'm going to pick up 2 beads and go back down. Now I would turn it over. We'll just tie a little knot here. Oops. Try not to knot the camera into it. All right. Now I'm going to come up right next to those 2 beads that I just did. And we're going to cover about the same distance. But this time we're going to use 3 beads. So it'll create a little pile. 1, oops, come on. 1, 2, 3. We're going to go back down the same distance. And there we go. So you can see the thread color matters because you do see a little bit of it there. And there we go. It's all secured onto the petal. Now we'll just travel over to this one. Now normally I would switch colors, but in the essence of time we won't. So we're going to come up right next to the hole. Now this is where I said you don't want to pull too tight because you don't want this wrinkle in there. So you want to make sure to keep it flat when you travel. I'm going to pick up 1 bead. And I'm going to go back down about the distance of the bead, or the width of the bead. And then I'm come up right next to it. Pick up another. This is great to do while you're watching TV or something mindless. Oops. And back down. And there we go. We have 3 beads on the green colored petal. Now on the back, you can see we have the travel threads. I would clip off this tail. For now, I can just tie this off here. When we get to the end. And there we go. We have our beads. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so here's a couple of different scenarios for beading. Now this Christmas tree, it has long strands of beads. And what I did was just string a whole bunch of beads longer than this distance so that they kind of droop down. You can add different kinds of beads in the middle, like here. And then I just added some beads to look like ornaments. In that case, it's only anchored at the beginning and the end of each one of these strings. Now, in the case of the swimsuit, I did some outline beading here. Now, I want to keep these kind of on the straight and narrow. Now, I could anchor at each bead. So I would come up, go through 1 bead, back down, up, through a bead, back down. But that would take forever. And quite honestly, if I just do 5 or 6 beads to cover a certain distance, that's enough to anchor it and keep them somewhat straight. So that's on those. Now on this swimsuit, I just have a few beads in the middle of the flowers on this swimsuit. And these come up from the back of the quilt after it's quilted, and they act almost like tying a quilt. So it helps to do the quilting in the center of this one. Now this one, this is the thong bathing suit. So I came up from the back, added a string of beads, came back up through the beads and back down just to create this little jewelry type of thing going on here. And of course, the thong bikini, they would have a belly button ring. So this is actually a wine charm for a wine glass that I just put into the fabric itself and added a couple of beads to it. And then for the boy cut bathing suit, I just had a couple of vintage buttons and one of these polymer buttons that I added for a little something on that one. So you can get quite heavy into the beading process here. Excuse me. So this was actually a class that I took that was a technique class to learn some different techniques. She said, just bring a piece of fabric you don't care about, and it was to learn how to do adding this little flangey thing here. But when I got all done, it's like, well, I can't just throw this away. So I got to beading it. And I kind of just followed what was on the fabric itself. So up here, there was little yellow or gold and green little petals. And I just added a single seed bead in the center of each one of those. There was these pears on the fabric, and I found these little beads that are about the same size, so I just sewed one of those onto each of the pears. And then they had this cart that was full of grapes, or raspberries, or red grapes, I guess, and over here. So I just did the pile method like I did with the blue petals, just kept piling beads on, using more beads than was necessary to cover the distance of what I was sewing, and it just creates these piles so that they look kind of like the grapes. And then added some pears in there too. There's also some, I don't know if you can see it on camera, but there's some bigger beads in here too. Did the same thing with the baskets and the grapes on here. So you can have a lot of fun with beading. It doesn't have to be just the center of a flower. So it's kind of fun. It gets a little addictive. So this was all done before the quilting process. So all of the traveling and everything is all inside the quilt. So there you go. Some other things you can do with beads. Well, are you ready for some leaves and stems? Let's get to it. So, stems. You can't really use the stems that came with your flowers. They're ugly and they're hard to deal with. And did I mention they're ugly? So I'm going to give you two different options for stems. One with fabric and one with yarn. Fabric's pretty straightforward. All you need is a piece of green fabric, apply some fusible on the back, cut out an undulating strip, and iron it down. It's pretty much that simple. But for this project, I wanted something a little bit more textural. So many years ago, I made this project and I used yarn for the stems. And I wanted to kind of do that same thing. But this yarn was a little bit skinny for the project that we're working on today, but it may do for yours. So this is kind of a fuzzy yarn, and I just did a zigzag stitch to hold it in place. But I wanted something a little bit chunkier, a little bit more 3D. So I found this yarn. Isn't that cool? It's the right size, the right color, but if I zigzag this down, it's just going to flatten it out, make it all lumpy, and it's not going to go. So I can't sew it on. So it's glue to the rescue. Now I could use a glue gun. I prefer not to, The glue gun is a little bit gloppy. I don't need quite that much glue. And the drying time is very quick. There's no time to fidget and manipulate things. So I use tube glue. So I use E6000, and any kind of tube glue will work. I also use the glue on occasion to apply beads or buttons or other embellishments. You just need to make sure whatever you choose, that it dries clear, that it works with whatever medium you're working for. So this works with fabric, metal, glass, wood, stone. It works with everything. The drying time is a little bit longer, so you do have to let it sit and let it dry. So that takes a little bit of extra time. But I do use this on occasion. So all I did for my stems, all I did was take my glue and draw a line of glue and then place each stem on there. So this end of the stem, just make sure that you tuck it up under the petals so it'll be hidden. Don't worry about the bottom end. That'll be caught up in the finishing when we finish it off. So don't worry about that. And that's pretty much it. Just lay this out, draw a line of glue, place it down, let it sit and dry. Now, if your yarn that you choose, if it sheds a little bit, then you may need to use a little bit of fray check on the end just to make sure it stays pretty. So that's it for stems. Are you ready for some leaves? All right, so for the leaves, you can use the leaves that came with your flowers. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not a fan of the plastic that's on the back. Now, these leaves, I liked the shape and I liked the size, just didn't like the plastic on the back. So I did buy this bunch of flowers, hoping that I could use these leaves. But when I got the project a little further along, I decided that those leaves didn't quite work, so that wasn't gonna happen. So we're gonna make our own. So I'm gonna use these leaves as my inspiration because, as I said, I do like the size and I do like the shape, but we're gonna make our own. It's pretty simple. All you need is 2 pieces of green fabric. You're gonna put some fusible in between, and we're gonna cut out the leaves and we're gonna shape them. So let me switch to the overhead camera and I'll show you how to do it. Okay, so here we are with our leaves. We have our fabric. It's got 2-sided, fused together. And all you're gonna do is draw out the shape that you want. Now I did use a Sharpie so you can see it easily on camera, but any kind of marking tool will do. I just placed the leaf down, drew around it with my Sharpie, and then we're going to cut one out. Now, for you perfectionists out there, I invite you to go outside in your yard and look at leaves and stems and flowers that are outside. Mother Nature doesn't make things perfect, so this doesn't have to be perfect. If you actually made it perfect, then it would look wrong when it's in the project. So there we have our leaf all cut out. Now, if you'll notice on the original leaf, it has jagged edges. I kind of like that. So how do we do that? Now I could use pinking shears, but again, that would make it perfect looking. And that's not what I want. So I'm going to grab a pair of small, very sharp scissors, and we're just going to make little cuts. Oops. We're going to make a big mess. And you just do little semicircle things here all the way around. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. We're not striving for perfect. We're striving to make a big mess on the table. And then when you get all done, I'm only going to do half here. There we go. When you get all done, if you don't like one part, for instance, these are a little bit pointy, well, I can just kind of take the points off of those a little bit. This one needs to be a little different. Now it's too straight. And just mess with it until you get it the way that you want it. And that's all there is to it. Pretty cool. Now we're going to pretend that I already did the other side. Get this all out of the way. Now we're going to shape the leaf. So we did two-sided. You decide which is the back and which is the front. I'm going to make this the front and this the back. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our hot iron. Reheat that up here. All right, our iron's hot. And all we're going to do is press this on here until it's good and hot. I mean like blistering hot. And what we're going to do is create this bunching kind of down the center. Now, if you don't have asbestos hands like I do, and then just hold it in place and just for a moment or two. If you don't have asbestos hands like I do, you can use like an iron finger, something like that. Once it's cooled down, it will stay that way. Isn't that pretty cool? So if you don't like it, well, just iron it flat, heat it back up, and do it again until you get it just how you want it. And we'll just hold that until it cools down. And there we go. Now we're going to add one little extra element to this. We're going to curl it. So out in nature, things get curled up on the edges. So what I'm going to do is heat up an edge here, right there. And then you're going to want to have some kind of round object. It can be this little piece of wood that I have here. Just wrap that around and hold it until it cools. If you had huge leaves, you could use a pencil. And there we have a little curl. And that way you get a little bit of the back showing on the front. Let's do one down here. Just put that there. We'll hold that for a second. And there we go. We have our leaf. Pretty neat, huh? Now, it will stay this way until it gets heated up again. Now, if you were laundering it, of course, all that will go away. But for a wall hanging like this, chances are it's probably not going to get laundered. So there we go. That's our leaf. Now, in the project, let me get the iron out of the way. In the project, I have a couple of different leaves here, and I just did one line of stitching kind of right next to that little ridge that we made. And that's it. It's all attached only in the middle here. Now I did make one smaller leaf here using the same shape, just made it a little bit smaller. And you just tuck the ends up underneath the fuzz of your stem here. If you were doing a fabric stem, then you want to have your leaves ready before you attach the stem so that you can tuck the leaves up under the stem before you iron it down. And that's it. That's our leaves. What do you think? Fun? What if you wanted to add something to your quilt that's a little bit unusual? Well, for certain things like these little crocheted flowers, they're soft. You can just sew those on. I just did a little French knot in the middle. Buttons, obviously, those are easy. If something already has a hole in it, like any of these wooden little embellishments, you can just sew through, kind of like I did with this little metal trinket here. I just did some stitches on the side to hold them on. I did do this big spider web quilt, and I found this really cool spider. Now if you'll notice on his feet there's little loops, so I just sewed through the top 2 loops and he's held on by that. So what if something doesn't have a hole already in it, like these bottle caps? No problem. All you need to do is drill a hole in the middle. So I just drilled a hole right in the middle of the bottle cap, and I came up through the hole, through a bead, and back down through the hole. You just need to make sure that the bead is bigger than the hole that you're doing. So there's a little bead on there. Now this one I did 2 holes. Now I could have just stitched across the 2 holes and made a big stitch, but I wanted it to coordinate with this bead. So I came up through the first hole, went through a bead, back down through the hole, up through the second hole, through a bead, and back down. Now you can add a hole to just about anything. I don't have it to show you, I gave it away, but I did a under the sea quilt once, and I put seashells on it. And I just drilled a hole into the shell and used a bead similar to this one and went through so it looked like a little pearl. Now I know oysters only make pearls, but hey, it's my world. I can do whatever I want. So you can add just about anything to a quilt that you want to. If it already comes with a hole, like these embellishments here, you can just sew them on, or you could also glue these on if you wanted to. Or you can drill a hole into just about anything and sew it on. Easy as that. Now, I do want to give you a little tip, depending on what kind of flowers that you've chosen. If you've chosen ones with really long, thin petals like this one, you can get a case of the droopies. Now, this is a collapsible bucket, so I really don't care too much about this one, but here's how you can fix that. So I could take a couple of stitches on the top edge here and just kind of hold it all until it gets open. You can also take your tube glue, make a little puddle of glue, take a pin, dip it in, get the smallest, tiniest little amount, and just kind of wipe it onto the back of the petals and hold it in place until it dries. And that'll take care of your droopies. Now this one, this is a stacked petal. This is actually 2 different flowers, but the big button that I've chosen to put in here kind of holds back all of that and prevents it from drooping. So if you have flowers that have long, thin petals, that's how you can take care of your droopies. It's time to finish up our project. Ooh, we're getting so close. All right, so if you've chosen to do yours in the vertical as I did, or the horizontal, either way, the next step we need to do is to cut off some of the background that we don't need. Now, where you do that depends on the flowers and the arrangement that you've chosen, but you just need to cut it off somewhere that is pleasing for your project. This one came out to about 29 inches long, I think. So I just cut off on the bottom. You can also cut off a little on the top if you need to. If you've done it in the horizontal, you need to cut off a little bit on each side, whatever works for your project. Now, whether you've chosen to use yarn or fabric for your stems, just make sure that they go all the way down to the bottom so that they get caught in the when you put the binding on. And then it's just a matter of layering it up and quilting it. So I chose to do very, very minimal quilting on this one. I just did some lines across the bottom for the ground and did some various lines across, I guess, for wind. And what you want to do is, now in this area, I didn't want to go across the stems because that would flatten it out. So I just went up to the stem, stopped, start, stop, start, stop, all the way across. Now when it came to the flower areas, I didn't do any in between. I just did across, pull the petals back a little bit, stop underneath the petals so it hides it, and then continue on the other side. Now, I did find in this extra little bundle, I found this cute little butterfly. Isn't he adorable? So I put him on there. Now he did have a plastic body. I may have mentioned a time or two that I'm not a big fan of plastic. So all I did was take my tube glue, make a little puddle of glue. I dipped him into the glue, set him where I wanted to. I did have to put a little something underneath each side to hold him upright until he dried. But you could see the plastic body. So I wanted to cover that up with a couple of beads. So here's how you do that. Just take a pin or a needle, an old one, put it through your bead. Take a little puddle of glue, dip it into the glue, place it where you want it, slide your pin out. And that does a couple of different things. One, it makes it really easy to handle the beads, especially if you have fingernails like I do. And it also makes sure that the whole of the bead stays on the side and not on the top. And then it looks like eyes. And then just apply your binding as you would any other project. And you're all done. Isn't it cute? Congratulations. Thank you for watching. I hope you had fun. And please visit my website. Hope to see you in the next video.